introduce David Clement, plant pathologist with the University of Maryland.
All right, good morning, good morning.
Good morning.
So you guys bring me in for the uplifting talks, right?
Right, yeah.
This is very uplifting, all the diseases.
Oh, yeah.
And then Stan will finish out with all the uplifting insects, right? All those good things, the pests, the problems. I'm always stuck on the program, you know, behind like somebody like George who gives you like all the positive stuff. And then I come in, you know, and tell you why you can't grow something or why something's gonna die. That's usually the way it works. So Stan and I both work with industry, and we also both work heavily with residential folks too. And I'm part of the Home and Garden Information Center, which was established quite a few years ago to handle homeowner questions and homeowner concerns. So this is the first thing we always get, like in the spring. Like we get this all the time, you know, on our hollies, or any broadleaf plant, but hollies, since we're talking about hollies. And it's just, you know, the winter desiccation, but we get this so many times that, you know, it's just a common question for us. And of course, then some of these dead areas on the leaves will actually grow secondary fungi.
Yeah, makes sense.
Not pathogens necessarily, but usually secondary fungi. So the necrosis is really from winter damage, freeze damage, you know, or drought, you know, and cold, things like that going into the winter. But we also see, I don't know if you guys can actually see this, but there's little tiny dots, you know, in that dead tissue. And then people get very excited about that. They think they have a pathogen, they think they have a big problem, they want to spray something. And that leaf's probably going to fall off. So that's what we tell people. We tell people not to get excited about, you know, things like this early in the spring. Because basically what happens next is that, you know, those leaves are going to fall off just due to leaf shed. We also get a lot of questions on spine spot. Does anybody know what spine spot is? You see it in the literature, but nobody can agree what the heck it is. Some people claim it's, you know, physical damage from the actual, you know, spines on the leaves. Other people say, well, it's not that at all. It's just oviposition, you know, from like holly leaf miner or some other insect or something like that. And then other people say, well, no, it's not any of that stuff. It's just, you know, something else. So really, it's just a term that we use for some of this damage. It looks like that. Sometimes it has a red border on it. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it sort of turns tan in the middle. If you try to isolate from those spots, you really don't get any fungi or anything. You don't get any bacteria, no pathogens. It's just like a physical damage. And you'll get that sort of purpley, sort of reddish spot sometimes. And sometimes you can have more spots, sometimes you can have fewer spots. Again, it's not something that's critical. It's not something that's really that pathogenic or, you know, detrimental to the plant, but we see it all the time.
He didn't say there's many reasons.
So we tell people not to worry about it. I think in a nursery situation, you know, you want your plants to look pretty good. So if you had a lot of this, maybe you'd try to figure out what the cause was. But in most cases, we don't tell people to do anything about this. This is what I was alluding to earlier. We get all kinds of inquiries, even from professionals, when their hollies do this. Oh my God, right? The hollies are dying. Call somebody. Do you have an expert on hollies? You know, who knows about these hollies? And you know, it's just the normal leaf shape, but people are very taken aback by the fact that you actually get this. Now, this happens in the spring. What's happening right now with the pines? It's the same thing, only happens in the fall. It's just normal needle shed. So when you get this in the spring, people want to, you know, get all excited and so forth. It takes them a few weeks to get over it. And then, you know, they see green leaves and then it's okay. Okay?
They're over it.
But when those leaves turn yellow, there's all kinds of spots on them. And there's more spots, right? They're discolored in some area, or they may be damaged. Or they may be leftover leaves, like I said, from the winter desiccation, what we call winter burn. So it kind of solves itself, okay? And so we kind of try to talk people through that.
I had a question.
Yes?
If there was higher nutritional levels, would that be less of these leaves would be shed, or is it X amount of years they're definitely going to shed?
It just seems to be variable on the, it's more weather related, I think. You know, depending on how much moisture there was, you know, the previous year, and sometimes how dry they were when they went into the winter. You'll see that even on the pines. How dry summer, we have more. I don't know, that's a good question. I don't know whether nutrition would affect that or not, but that's a good question.
We do recommend that they water their broadleaf
Yes,
evergreens.
before in the fall, going into the winter, yes, absolutely.
And I did have a comment about this, about the
Go ahead.
shedding in the spring.
Yep.
I've noticed that it's less on certain selections of holly as well. For example, Ilex opaca Dan Fenton has very minimal shedding. Ilex opaca Martha's Vineyard has very minimal shedding. So it is.
Cultivar.
Yeah, it is selection dependent also. And also the Coneyana's don't seem to do much shedding at all.
Yeah.
So,
Excellent. So you guys know more about the variety differences. I hate this kind of stuff. I know you guys like all these weird hollies. Right? This is great stuff for you guys. You really like this. This looks like a disease to me. I could blame all sorts of things on this. I could blame this on nutrition and everything else. This is and you guys know more of the varieties than I do, but I just picked one variety. So yeah, when you do stuff like this, don't call us. Or warn us ahead of time, right? Because it's really difficult if we get a picture like that and we really are not. We're getting signals again. You know, I wouldn't know. I would have to assume it's something different. If it is a cultivar, that's great. And the general public is into that too. They like variegated plants. So there's a whole bunch of pathogens that do get on hollies. You know, and you guys are lucky. I think as a crop, as a nursery plant, you guys are pretty lucky. There aren't too many serious leaf diseases that you guys deal with. So even though I list these things and it looks like a bad news story here, really the kinds of leaf spots that you get are usually dependent on weather. Or, you know, in a nursery production, it's dependent on how densely the plants are, you know, spaced. Usually what happens is they get into a landscape and they get a little more air circulation and these leaf spots kind of go away. And that's what we usually tell people. We usually don't recommend fungicides or preventative measures in the landscapes. Now in a nursery situation, we might get into some fungicides. But in general, with hollies, I think you guys have a pretty good crop as far as, you know, foliar diseases. You don't really have too many serious things. None of these things are life-threatening to the holly. So they may knock off a few leaves, but they usually don't, you know, do a huge amount of damage. Some of them are pretty cool. I'm going to show you some pictures. At least I think they're cool. But they're not. There's no way that any of these are really life-threatening. Now, if you do look at the literature, we live in a pretty nice area for hollies. If you go to the Pacific Northwest or down even southeast, they have a lot more disease pressure on some of these leaf diseases. So they have a little bit more problem. But they, in general, they still get by with fewer fungicides and not much problem even in the landscape. So this is one that Stanton likes to talk about. So I'll leave this one, but this one, because of all the scale problems he's going to talk about, this is what we see as pathologists as sooty mold. And this is just superficial growth on the surface of the leaf. The fungus is growing on the honeydew and the insect excrements. And it just kind of, it plasters the leaves, but those leaves could be cleaned off, or they could be scraped off, or whatever. It's not a permanent, sort of pathogenic relationship there. So that's just sort of, I'm going to gloss over that. It's just sort of a superficial thing as far as a pathologist goes. So it's an insect problem.
But can there be enough of that to be a problem?
Absolutely. I always like diseases to be
Lanternfly,
important.
for instance.
So you could say that will cause tremendous damage, and you have to clean it up, but you're going to have to deal with the insect problem.
Deal with the cause.
This is an interesting one. This is Coniotherium. I don't know if you've actually seen this one. It's kind of a cool one. It starts off as a tan spot, but makes these nice black lesions later on. We see this sometimes. Again, more in production than we see in the landscape. These are diseases. All these leaf diseases are diseases of high humidity, high moisture. So if you have them in a nursery situation, or if you have them in a tight spacing, even sometimes the cultivar of the holly makes a difference. If it's a dense, canopy on the holly, like if it's been sheared. You guys like to shear hollies, right?
No, not really.
That's good. That's good. So what we see in the landscape is different. Yes, people like to shear hollies, and they make that canopy so dense that they sort of create their own problems with some of these leaf problems, especially since they, so if they could just thin the plants, and that's what we recommend. We recommend that they go in, they actually prune to thin, and to let air and light and so forth back into them to actually alleviate these problems. We don't usually recommend fungicide. So this is Coniotherium. This is Cylindrocladium. Now this is actually a little more serious in the Pacific Northwest rather than here, because they get a rainier period during the winter. So this will cause some leaf defoliation in the Pacific Northwest. I haven't seen it here as a major problem. So just tell them to keep it. But you're aware of it. It's something that under high rainfall, high humidity, this one's going to give you a target, with a sort of a central bullseye. So it's going to give you a little more, and it is going to cause some defoliation. Most of these fungi, when they cause damage like that, they actually release a plant hormone called ethylene. What do we use ethylene for with plants?
Ripening.
Actually, ripen bananas, we ripen fruit. Ethylene can build up, actually, if you store plant materials, like cut flower materials, for example. So you have to have ventilation. So ethylene is something, it's a result of the damage to the tissue, and sometimes the fungi themselves produce it. And that's what causes your leaf abscission or your defoliation. And then this one is what they call tar spot. It doesn't look so much like tar there. It kind of looks like a yellow, and this is a small picture, so it kind of looks like a yellow, black sort of mottle. This one kind of looks better. This is tar spot. Now, if you go through the literature, actually, if you go through some of this stuff, this is actually mislabeled. This is from Maryland Biodiversity. They called this a rust. I'll show you a rust. That's actually tar spot. So,
is it the same pathogen on corn?
it's in the same family. And so we have maples that have tar spot. Stuff like, so it's that black sort of fungus. It almost looks like a little piece of tar. And then on maples and some of these others, it looks like you put your thumb in it because it has like a little pattern. And the spores are actually it's like a little bump, and the spores are actually in that structure, and then it has to wear down and release its spores. I don't see this very often, but it's out there. People will send us pictures in occasionally like this of tar spot. It's a minor fungus. Again, so you guys are pretty lucky. And it's just there on the leaf, and it doesn't really spread, doesn't cause defoliation, doesn't do a whole lot of damage. So this is the typical leaf we get that's sent into us. So what is that? It's got spots on it. We get that all the time. They'll send us in some holly leaves, and they say, what's wrong with it? And there's really not much wrong with it. And so we tell them to live with this. I mean, again, I've talked to you all about these leaf spots. And this is just some general leaf spotting, okay? So, I mean, you're gonna see this in your nurseries, you're gonna see this in your landscapes. Always get, some of these leaf spots, but they're not that detrimental. So, I guess my take-home message is for leaf spots, don't get too excited. And don't worry about them too much. They kind of take care of themselves most of the time. If they do fall off, if they do cause some defoliation, it usually doesn't hurt the plant, and we move on. If you want to get into fungicides, it's a whole different story, and then, maybe in a nursery situation, maybe something like that, but I would not treat these. Yes?
Should we recommend that they pick them off and
If
break
they want to.
underneath?
A lot of times it's just, sort of scattered through the plant, or the leaves will eventually fall off.
And break up the litter at the base?
You're supposed to, we tell people to do that all the time. Does that actually work?
I don't know. Doesn't it jump back up?
We tell them to do it.
Incubate.
I don't think it really works, but that's a good thing to tell them. It gives them something to do. They can keep busy. But it's really hard to collect all those leaves. It's really hard to dispose of. Yeah.
I think that, like on Alex Opaca,
Yeah.
pick a cultivar that don't do that.
Okay. Well, give us some more. Give us some more then.
If you go out in the wild and just
Good.
look, probably half or more do. And a lot of times instead of buying a holly, people go out and try to dig one up,
Yeah.
and they may get one like that. And if it does that, it's gonna do, you can pick them off this year, but next year it's gonna do it again. And
That's what happens, yeah.
But there are varieties that.
Well, if
don't
you
do
got
that.
good varieties, then we need to promote them better, because, and that's why I kind of would like to hear some of your feedback, because I want some feedback later. I did find one picture, out of focus picture on holly rust. I've never seen holly rust here in Maryland. Has anybody seen holly rust here in Maryland?
Never seen it.
Well, you're about to see it now. It's out of focus. It's a terrible picture, but that looks bad, and that'll cause a lot of defoliation. Now that's only down in the southern Appalachian region, like in Georgia, North Carolina. That's the only place that they've ever reported rust on hollies.
Just because of such high humidity?
I don't know. I don't know whether that rust is endemic to that area.
Yeah.
Is it the same thing as cedar apple rust?
It's not quite the same. It actually stays, I think this life cycle stays pretty much on holly. But I've never studied it. I've never seen it. I don't, and hopefully they keep it. They don't send it, but if they do send some up, this is what you're gonna see. So just be aware that it is a southern problem. Yes?
Aren't fungal diseases very species specific? Because everybody keeps asking, isn't it like cedar apple rust? It's like, they're very species specific, is my understanding.
That's why you need a plant pathologist all the time. Full time. Just remember that when I retire. You're gonna replace me, right? Yes, you're right.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, and the same thing with insects. Stan will tell you the same thing. So it's those relationships. Now we did have a serious problem on winterberry recently. Does anybody grow winterberry?
Yeah.
Have you had problems on the fruit and the leaves? We've had a couple of cut flower growers that actually use this as a cut woody, right? Cut woody stems, and there were some leaf spots and then some fruit lesions. And what happens, I mean, you grow this thing for the berries, right? The berries will fall off if they got infected. So it was a foliar disease that was moving on to the berries and causing the berries to fall off in storage. So that wasn't very good for that particular
In
person.
the landscape too, or just in storage?
Not in the landscape. This was a cut flower grower.
Just in storage.
And it was a woody stem issue. And this has been an issue now. Actually, it's grown more and more important as these cut branches and so forth are more popular. So the folks at Ohio State, Dr. Francesca out there, basically started working on this. So we can thank her for her research. She's done a lot of research on this. There's a bunch of different fungi that she came up with. There wasn't just one. And that's the case with most of these things. It's not just one. It's usually a complex of fungi. So there are a whole bunch of these fungi that she came up with. They caused leaf spots initially, and then from the leaves, they actually infected the fruit. And she came up with the timing. That was the most important part, okay? It's really the dissemination and infection occurs during flowering. 2 weeks. So if you can apply a fungicide during that 2-week, 3-week period of flowering, then you can greatly reduce this problem. And this was a big help to the industry. So again, this is where the research is kind of, if we have a problem and we actually have colleagues working on it together, we came up with this, and she has a fungicide program for just those 2 or 3 weeks, and pretty much then you're okay with the rest of the year. So that was an important sort of sidebar to my statement that some of these leaf spots are not so critical, but it is in this case because you're actually growing it for the berries.
Like
Okay.
orchard plants.
Yeah. This is in a nursery situation. It's in a high density. So again, I thought that was a good success.
Does that hurt your pollinators?
Well, fungicides, in my mind, I'm kidding. I don't think so. The fungicides that are used here, I don't think are going to hurt the pollinators. So they're not insecticides. They're fungicides, and I believe that they have been tested there.
I think chlorophthalonil is the only one they picked up in bees.
That's right. Chlorothalonil is the worst one, and that's an old-fashioned one. But these are some of the newer fungicides have been clear. We're getting into a more serious thing now, web blight. This is bad in the landscapes and nurseries on blue hollies, primarily the meserves. I guess you call them different things, but I call them blue hollies. They have the smaller leaves, the thick foliage.
Reserves.
They tend to be dense. The symptoms tend to start lower to the ground where the humidity is a little higher and work its way up. And it just creates this kind of a thing. Just die back, and those brown leaves just hang on. And they just stay there. So I hope you guys have some resistant varieties, because we do see this in the landscape and in the nurseries. This is a big problem. We tell people to prune for better air circulation. Here's a close-up of it. It is kind of a messy disease on blue holly, and I've never seen it on American holly and some of the other hollies. I've only seen it on the blue hollies. And in the industry, it's kind of known that it's on blue hollies. So they will go in and prune. Now you can prune that out. Once the disease is over with, you can prune it out, and you'll get a flush of new growth. That's the good news. But it happens on almost a yearly basis. So it's a problem. If you guys can give us some resistant varieties to that, that'd be great. It's kind of a pain to have to try to spray a fungicide for this, because again, the canopies are dense, and you'd have to go in there probably with 3 sprays. So So I'm looking for a solution to this one. This is a rhizoctonia. You know, so it's being splashed up, or it's coming from a soil source, and then it's spreading through the foliage under high humidity.
Is there an actual webbing?
And it'll actually kind of look like spider web. The foliage just kind of mats together and just sort of hangs on there. In fact, that picture was taken yesterday, so it's still there. Because me being a plant pathologist, I didn't prune it out.
Yeah, that's a big problem in East Tennessee, Knoxville, Oak Ridge.
Okay.
And the arboretum we have there, they reserves do terrible.
Yeah.
Have all this dieback.
So if I was a good person, I'd be pruning that out and cleaning it up and removing it. But I like
It
to
looks
see.
terrible though when you.
I like to see diseases. Okay. So web light basically is what I just said. And pruning. I put chlorothalonil in there, but you probably should take that out. Thiophanate methyl still works. Cleary's is still a good product for this. All right, and then this is the gorilla in the room. This is black root rot, Labiopsis root rot. And we have, whenever we get a call on Japanese hollies, and they tend to show these types of symptoms, we think of black root rot. So again, we got to come up with a resistant Japanese holly. They always start off sort of, you know, the foliage kind of turns a yellow or a straw color, and then it just basically the whole plant kind of goes down. It's usually on plants that are planted in the wrong location, I'll give you that. But even on plants that are fairly well sited, any kind of drainage problem, and we get this black root rot problem on Japanese hollies. And this Helleri here is one of the worst ones. I give you a list later on. So black root rot also gets on inkberry. I can't figure that out because inkberry is in a wet area. I've never really seen it bad on inkberry, so maybe it's just in the literature. But I see it all the time on Japanese. I don't know how many times I've seen it on blue. Blue is susceptible as well. It forms a resting spore, a chlamydospore that actually stays in the soil. So once you have this disease, you can't just replant. You're going to have to put something else in there, like an American holly, which tends to be resistant, or something else, but you can't put another Japanese holly back in there. Here's the host range that I've seen in the literature. Maybe you guys know more than I do. I just put this up here because, but it's all the Japanese, right? And then it's the blue ones. I guess Blue Maid is a very susceptible one. Blue Prince, China Boy, China Girl, all those. Dragon Lady, I was shocked to see Dragon Lady. Dragon Lady is a nice one for a hedge. The Alpine and the American are fairly resistant, and the highly resistant ones are English and Chinese. So if you put a Chinese holly in there, yeah, you're fine. But any of the Japanese hollies or the blue hollies are very susceptible to this problem. So this is a problem in the industry, I think. You see these symptoms if you wash the roots off. They tend to be on the root tips, the blackening, like this. So it almost, and it usually starts like in the middle of the root versus the end of the roots. It'll actually start in the middle of the roots sometimes. What's exciting to me is when you look under a microscope, you won't see that. This is what you'll see. You'll see these spores that are dark and they're segmented. So that's the proof that we have the disease. So it's easy to diagnose. It's just, it is a problem because we do have a lot of people planting the little Japanese hollies. They're kind of like boxwood lookalikes, and that's why I guess people are planting them. So we have some management. Keeping the pH low is actually one of the cultural things they can do. If you keep it below about 5, 6 or so, that's one cultural way to do it. If you're in a nursery situation, please don't reuse your containers. Use a medium that's like a pine bark based medium, not a peat based. This comes in on peat. So it actually is not a good idea to use peat based media for this problem. Use pine bark. You need to sterilize any equipment, any kind of benches. Sterilize your tools if you're taking cuttings. This is a disease that'll just hang around. And it's spread by insects. So Stan likes it too. So it's shore flies, fungus gnats, all that kind of stuff. They'll spread these spores. So don't have a lot of that kind of thing going on. So you have to have a very clean facility if you're going to do propagation. There are no fungicides that will cure it. I just went through some of that. Keep your soluble salts down too. And there are no fungicides that will cure it. There are preventative fungicides. But once we see this disease, basically you're throwing plant material out. So you can prevent it, but if you're preventing it without knowing that you have it, it's kind of, you're on that pesticide thing. Just stay clean. If you're clean, you basically can get by, and you'll have a good product. There is a biological that people have tried, but it hasn't been very effective, the trichoderma. It's shown some effectiveness, but not a lot. So that's a bad one. This is another bad one, Phytophthora. This is a water mold. So this comes in on waterlogged soils, poor drainage. Again, kind of like the one before, only Phytophthora is the same thing. You can't cure it. You can only prevent it. It'll cause wilting. This one tends to be more on the root tips. You actually dig up the plant. Tends to be more on the root tips. You'll get the rat tailing. If you have a plant, you can scrape the bottom near the stem and get a discoloration. That's different. So Coleoptera won't give you this. So you can tell the difference sometimes with symptoms. This one tends to be on all cultivars. So again, it's not just Japanese. So this one's more of a general poor drainage pathogen. If you look at these root systems, you've got some healthy roots here, but you got a lot of discolored roots. So look at root systems, pull things out of the pot. If you look at the root, some of these roots, you'll see what we call rat tailing, where the cortex comes off, the whole bark sloughs off. You see that little middle portion of the root. So none of that's a good sign. That's usually a root rot problem. Having said that, has anybody gone over the Eastern Shore like during a wet spring and seen hollies growing in water? Right? And if you walk through the woods on the Eastern Shore, you'll see hollies as an understory plant in soggy areas. Well, why is that? I mean, we don't know. I mean, that is very bizarre. If you put a holly in a nursery situation or a landscape situation with poor drainage, they usually die. But if you go over the Eastern Shore, just walk through the woods. Or if you see them in flooded fields sometimes, they're big plants.
It's along the James River.
Yeah, they don't die. I don't know why that is, but I've seen it. I've actually seen hollies in standing water. And yet, if you go by all the literature, that's terrible for hollies. So don't go to the Eastern Shore. Don't look.
Down in North Carolina, where I'm from, the largest ilex or papers you find are in the river bottom.
Yes.
Where the soil can at times flood and be like, say, you can't hardly walk in it.
I know.
That's where you find the largest ilex.
So there's something we're missing.
I've
There's
always
something
assumed
we're missing.
it has something to do with better oxygenation there, because wherever there are footpaths and there's compaction, they die.
I don't know.
Maybe it's micro.
We ought to put somebody on that problem, because
I think there's a whole bunch of them.
we see it in landscapes and nurseries as root rots, and yet in nature we see holly in wet situations a lot of times.
definitely see inkberry in wet situations.
And we see inkberry, obviously, too, but I see American holly in wet situations. So anyway, Phytophthora is the same management. Don't. We've got chemicals, but we do see cankers occasionally on hollies. Not very often. That's usually a result of drought stress, believe it or not. If we have a drought period or a heat wave, and hollies get stressed, we'll see some branch dieback. We'll see some branch thinning. And it's usually a discolored area on the branch. If you scrape that discolored area, you'll see dark underneath. But you can prune that out, and hollies will recover. If you prune it out, they'll recover. But if you see dieback, like in the top or in the branches, sometimes that's due to a drought stress. There are a few nematodes. We don't see many nematodes here in Maryland because we don't look for them. If you don't look for them, you don't find them. But south of here in the southeast and in Florida, they do have nematode problems on hollies. So just don't look at your roots. These are what nematodes look like. They always have, the plant parasitic ones have a stylet. They have this little tooth. But this is what nematode damage could look like. Now that might almost be, you might think that's black root rot. Except this is going to be across the board. It's not going to be just on Japanese hollies. But you see the darkening of the roots, and some of these are inside. That's a cool picture. You guys probably can't see it though. That's a cool picture of a nematode inside the tissue. That's a lesion nematode. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then this is what root knot looks like. Now that's not on holly roots because I couldn't find holly roots, but that's what root knot would look like. It's the galls on the roots. And if you pick those roots apart, this little white guy right here is the nematode. It's has a neck and it has a little body. Like I said, I've never had them submitted because I don't think we've looked for them. We really haven't had a nematologist at Maryland for a while, so it's more of a southern thing. I have a couple of weird ones. This one, I've never seen this. This is in the literature called Spiropsistol. It's down south of here, like sometimes you see it in North Carolina. It's a galling. And it's like a bunch of shoots coming out of a central spot. I've never seen it. Maybe we'll never see it. But it's something to be aware of. That it's just it's a disease that causes tissue to form and then adventitious shoots to come out. And this one, I have seen stuff like this. Yeah. If you use Roundup or glyphosate in your nursery or in your landscape, on some of the woody plants we do see abnormal growths, like these leafy growths sometimes develop on green tissue. It's like a sublethal dose of Roundup or glyphosate. So it's just an anomaly. If you haven't killed your holly with the glyphosate, you might see this. It doesn't really grow out of it. It kind of just sits there. So you can try to prune it up, but it's affecting the whole health of the plant. And that's all that's bad. Everything else is good. All right, I'm done. So, any questions while Stanton gets ready to do his thing?
Oh, he left the room.
Oh, good. I can talk about it.
Talk about it.
No, seriously. Any questions? I would really like some help on, if you have some varieties that have fewer leaf spots, things like that. That'd be great. Things that we can recommend. I have in my little holly collection, the one I like the best is that Maryland Dwarf. And then I've got a Cedar Hill and I've got Baltimore Buzz.
It's the male.
I don't have a Miss Helen. Gotta get a Miss Helen here for, you know,
Dan
match
Fenton.
Baltimore. Was there. But I love that Maryland dwarf. That's a nice one. I think you guys should really push that one more. I mean, that's a great, and that would take the place of, you know, maybe some of those Hellerized and things like that.
So we
Yeah,
we do push the Maryland dwarf at NAMS.
Good.
So over there, buy another
Good.
one.
Are the spreaders hard to buy?
No, they're very.